What's going on, everybody? I am back. It's me, John Stargarian, doing episode number 188 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, I will be talking about UFC Vegas 95. Solo show tonight because my boy Lags, my co-host, is at the beach with family. As such, you won't see our normal layout when you watch the stream because I had John Kelly design it, and I do not know how to change it to just one person. So you just got me here. But that's fine. I have a lot of opinions on this card, pretty low level. But there's a lot to talk about. Fair amount of betting spots, I think. Real quick, I'm going to recap last card before we dive into this. I did pretty well. I won 3.45 units. Made a couple decent ads toward the end of the week, a couple bad ones. I had, in terms of straight picks, I had Mikhailo Lasejek for 1.5 units at plus 210. That didn't work out. I also had him to win by KO in round 1 for 0.25 units, which did not work out. I had 1.8 units on Mackenzie Dern minus 120. I ultimately ended up adding that and kind of 180 on my breakdown from last week. Primarily because the more I thought about it, the less I felt like I saw, a lot of scope for Loopy to win this clearly. Just felt like Dern at worst was going to be in a close fight and had all of the finishing upside, and Loopy probably wasn't going to take her down. So, when it's that kind of dynamic and it's a close fight and one side is all the finishing equity, it's kind of got to be north of minus 120. So I ended up taking the plunge there. Thought that was a pretty good bet. I had 2 units on Sam Hughes plus 160. I do wonder if I should have just waited to play this live because the fight kind of played out somewhat similarly to how I expected. It's just one of those things where it's like, maybe it would have been better to grab her plus 300 or whatever she was after a round. But yeah, Sam Hughes is really tough. I know a lot of people are talking about Dudakova finishing her, but Hughes, she's a really good grappler, honestly. Like, not someone who's easy to hold down or submit. Obviously very tough on the feet. And yeah, she just pushes a hellacious pace. Hughes always going to have issues with women that are more athletic than her. But if they can't match the pace, she's going to cook them. And that's pretty much what happened there. So I won 3.2 units there. And then I had a parlay with Shamil Gaziev to win and the over 2.5 rounds in Hughes Dudakova. That was minus 146 to win 2 units. That hit. I got a little too cute in the main event, though. Honestly, I thought that the grappling would be much more dominant for the Umar side of things. So as that being the case, I bet the under 3.5 rounds because I thought Umar would be getting the pretty dominant positions fairly consistently. And I also had a half unit, I believe, on Umar by submission. Neither of those were good bets at all. But yeah, it was a good card. In terms of the main event itself, I feel like, Umar's obviously, I don't want to say he's obviously the next champ, but it's obvious he's got a championship pedigree. I think most people would have kind of agreed with the opinion pre-fight that if Umar couldn't dominate on the mat, he was very likely to lose that fight, given, how good a striker Corey Sandhagen is and the general pace he pushes. And Umar actually outstruck him by 20 significant strikes, which was wildly impressive to me. So, yeah, Umar's the truth. Really no interest in fading him. I think I can't even say I think O'Malley would be an interesting fight just because I think Umar's grappling is probably too much for him. Merab would be interesting just because Merab is such a relentless fighter. But, yeah, Umar's the man, he's answered every question I've had of him. So we'll see what happens with him. But anyway, before we get started, guys, 2 messages here. First, fightnumbers.com. Check it out. John Kelly's site. I talk about it every week, but it is great. They got John Kelly's DFS picks, which are absolutely amazing. They have bets from Ozzy, Evan, and Pepe. 3 awesome dudes. I've hung out with all of them in real life. Great times, all of them. All super sharp guys. You want to support the good people in this space, and there are 3 of them. They also have the content coming from Chad, MMA Giga Chad, also the man. And then they also have the live odds screen. It works as well as fightodds.io does, except it updates in real time. And they have all the live lines from domestic and overseas books. It's well worth the investment. You're honestly, just with the betting picks alone and John Kelly's DFS projections alone, you're probably getting your value worth it right there. But right now, you can use the promo code CLUB, CLUB, for 30% off your first month there. So yeah, check them out. And one other thing, guys, I am actually looking right now for new accounts myself to bet football, college football, and NFL with for this upcoming season. If you have any credit books or PPH accounts, hit me up. If you can refer me, I'll give you $250 per referral. If you refer me to 5 separate credit books, I'll give you a $1,000 bonus. All of that we really appreciated. So yeah, any credit books, hit me up. Looking to get more action down on football this year. But yeah, guys, so with all that said, drop a like, subscribe. We're going to get right into it here. Club and Sub Podcast, solo show. John Stargarian going to guide you through this card. First fight of the night, we got Stephanie Luciano taking on Alen Car. Current price, we got Luciano currently minus 160, Alen Car plus 140. Lines bounced around a bit. I played Alen Car for a unit and a half at plus 165. I actually just still think it's a little wide where it is right now. I just don't want to go too crazy with like a women's fight, especially given the dynamic of the first fight. If you haven't seen the first fight, Alen Car more or less dominated the grappling in the first 2 rounds and then gassed out and got 10-8 in round 3. Ended up being a draw. My biggest takeaway and the reason I like the Alen Car spot here, like I do think Luciano's got a huge standing edge in this fight, but I don't really believe enough time has gone by to where she could really, have learned enough to shut out Alen Car's grappling. And so, like, I think that path it's just a much more consistent of the 2 paths. So, like, the real question you have is, is Alen Car going to gas every time to get potentially finished? And it's like, maybe, it's very possible if she's grappling hard, she's going to slow down in round 3 more often than not. But it's like, how often does she get finished and how often does she get 10-8'd? I don't think that often, to be honest. I think she might lose round 3 at a decent clip. But, I mean, that first fight honestly seemed like the bottom edge of, or like a tail end type of fight for Alen Car, where it's like she gassed horribly, and on top of which Luciano did enough damage and had enough output in round 3 to get a unanimous 10-8. I just don't think that happens that consistently. Now, Luciano, 23 years old, very likely improving. Could she have just leveled up her skills enough to finish her? Yeah, but I just think it's going to be a big. I just think it's going to be a big. It would require a lot of improvement in the grappling in a very short period of time for me to think, the dynamic is too tangibly different. Glenbot asked, do I think Luciano having dengue fever and pulling out of her last fight will affect her this fight? Hard to say. It could. I mean, dengue fever is known for sticking with people for months or years in some cases. I'm not really capping it with that in mind. I think the one thing that could tell us is just that it took her a couple months off of training, which makes it even less likely that she will have improved enough to deal with Alen Car's grappling. But with all that being said, it's a women's fight at the end of the day. Luciano certainly has the better hardware and is a more dangerous fighter on the feet. I do think, she's much more reliable late in this fight than Alen Car is. I just feel like when someone has, 8 to 10 minute of top time upside and a takedown is probably the round or at least the dominant position, it's just really, really hard for the price to be where it is, especially when we've already seen it play out. So yeah, I'm on Alen Car here. Moving on, we got Jarno Erens. He's taking on Yusuf Zalal. Current price, Zalal minus 415. The comeback on Erens plus 315. I believe if you guys follow the Die Hard MMA show, also a little whiskey for the fans. Cheers. If you guys follow Die Hard MMA show, Clint made this an anchor pick this week. Had a couple people ask me, do I think it's a good anchor or a bad anchor? I'm not really into the anchor parlay thing myself, and I have seen some people make the case that Erens is the side this week. I don't think he is. I think the line at minus 400 is just fine, personally. I guess the bull case for Erens is he is a relatively skilled jiu-jitsu player, and he's a decent striker. And look, obviously plays outstanding here. I'd expect it to play a lot closer than the money line. But I don't really think his jiu-jitsu is anything that he's really likely to threaten Zalal with off bottom. Is he capable of getting up? I suppose theoretically, maybe he is, except every single time we've seen this guy taken down, he just plays guard and tries to sweep to get up. And I just don't think he's that good at it. And so it's hard for me to think that anything changes too tangibly in that regard here, on top of which it's like, well, can he stop the takedowns? Well, he's got a 36% takedown defense. I haven't really seen anything from him in the tape that I like in terms of his defensive wrestling. And I think Zalal, he's not a great wrestler, but I mean, he's serviceable. And I think serviceable is going to be enough to get this down. And then even on the feet, Erens he should compete there. He's a decent striker, but I think he's a bit chinny, and he looked very, very, very susceptible to calf kicks against Sung Woo Choi, which Zalal throws a lot. So, yeah, I mean, I just think Zalal's got him covered everywhere here. Obviously, if they stand, it's going to play closer than the number, but I feel like Zalal is going to get top time pretty easily. I think one argument you could make here, and it's the only spot in this fight that's semi-interesting, although it's getting hammered, so it's less interesting now, is it goes the distance, but that's up to -200. So probably not interested there. Zalal should win easily, though. Next fight, we got Carl Williams taking on Janata Denise. Current price, Carl Williams -200, comeback on Denise +170. I think Carl Williams -200 to -230 is probably fine. I think you're going to see many make the argument that Carl Williams isn't great at control. Therefore, Denise is more live than, say, someone like Justin Tafa or some of the other people Williams has beat. I agree he's not a great control grappler. However, the limited footage we have of Denise on bottom in his last fight with Austin Lane looked horrific to me. So I don't really have much confidence that he's going to be working up. He just seemed pretty happy to close his guard and try to survive on bottom. Conversely, I think Carl Williams will be able to get takedowns here fairly easily if he wants them. Now, I mean, the big X factor in this fight is, number one, Carl Williams is an absolute liability on the feet. I just don't trust this guy there at all. He's got okay hands, when he throws them, but he's got no defense at all. He looks kind of fragile to me. So, I mean, he does seem like he's a knockout waiting to happen. Can't really argue against that at all. But with that being the case, the other big X factor in this fight is gas tanks. I think most people think Carl Williams has kind of a sketchy gas tank, and it certainly looks sketchy in round 3 against Justin Tafa. I actually think Denise has a pretty sketchy gas tank himself. I know he won his last fight in round 2, but if you watch that fight, all of his speed was gone in round 2. Him and Lane are just kind of standing there chucking bombs, and he seemed a lot slower than he has in most of his tape. Denise usually pretty fast hands, and Jared Curry saying if they bother to open up SGPs, could be having fun with Williams ML and total takedown totals. I don't disagree. Glenbot asking if the type of one-dimensional striker Carl Williams could finish on the ground. I'm going to get to that. Yeah, I mean, so I think Denise, look, if you watch that fight, Lane got on top of him. He didn't even work that hard, and he looked gassed in round 2 to me. That's what I thought personally. So it's I think Williams is going to gas if he grapples hard for 3 rounds. I just think Denise is probably going to be more gassed if he's getting grappled in this fight. In terms of whether Williams could finish, I guess I just haven't really seen any kind of really dangerous ground game from Williams at all, either in terms of ground and pound or hunting submissions. He more or less washed Jimmy Lawson on the Ground and Contender series and didn't really get that close to submitting him in that fight. So I don't know. I don't really think he's very likely to finish this fight. I actually think there's some plus money decision prices out there on the Carl Williams side, and I think that's kind of interesting because I think 67 to 70% Williams is probably fine, but I legit think he's 55 to 58%, of that is by decision. I don't think he's likely to finish the fight at all. So plus money decision actually is, I think, a decent look here. So that's my lean. It's Williams' decision. I understand why people would bet Denise. I just feel granted it's heavyweight, so this dynamic is a bit different than it is at some of the other weight classes, but something I've noticed over time is people really like to fade janky looking ugly strikers that are grappling based with decent strikers, even though a lot of the times the reason those guys can be in the UFC is because they're very good grapplers. Like Darren Elkins. How many people have lost money over the years trying to fade Darren Elkins because his striking's janky as fuck? But it's meanwhile, Darren Elkins has great cardio and he sticks to you like glue. Those kind of guys just consistently get underpriced. Now, do I think Williams is underpriced? No, I'm not laying -200 on him. If he got to -160, I would, but I don't really think he's going to get there. Decision may be intriguing to me, but yeah, I think Carl Williams, he's either going to die or he's going to take rinse, wash, and repeat on takedowns with Denise here, and my lean is the latter there. Moving on, Carol Rosa, Penny Kianzad. Current price, Rosa -200, comeback on Kianzad +170. And to be honest, this is the first of 3 women's fights we're going to talk about on this call. Actually, is it 3 or 2? Oh, it looks like it's only 2. Yeah, first of 2 women's fights we're going to talk about on this card. And I feel similarly about both of them. I don't really think you can trust Carol Rosa at -200. Am I betting Penny? No, because Penny is just, she's just a zero if you take her down. So, I see some upside for Rosa covering that price if she gets takedowns here aggressively. But she rarely shoots takedowns aggressively. I mean, she fought Irene Aldana last fight, didn't attempt a takedown. And that kind of tells you all you need to know about what she's prioritizing. I think she attempts about 3.5 per fight, if I'm not mistaken. And Penny's not like a horrible like defensive wrestler. She's got okay first level TDD. So, but I mean, the bottom line is, that possibility is there. And with Penny being as poor as she is on the bottom, I do think you have to, factor in the fact that Rosa could have like minus 200 to 250 upside in this fight. But on the feet, I really think it's a competitive fight. I think Cara Rosa has been like one of the most comically like overrated fighters in the UFC for years now. Obviously, she throws high volume, nasty leg kicks, keeps a pace. So that's good. Like, I don't think she's a bad fighter. I just don't think she's like an elite fighter. And on the other side, it's like, Penny's dealt with leg kickers before, and she's, I think, probably a better boxer of the two. Really nice straight combination. She has much better setups, in my opinion, than Rosa does. So it's going to be kind of like the leg kicks of Rosa against, the hands of Penny, in my opinion. And we kind of just saw this fight. Now, granted, Aldana's naturally bigger than Penny is, hits way harder, so it's an imperfect comparison. And I think Rosa probably competes on volume anyway, and maybe even beats her there. Like if you go back in time, Penny fought Alexis Davis, and that was a pretty much a 50-50 fight, kind of similar, where you saw basically, Penny head strikes against Alexis, basically kicking her for 15 minutes. So I don't really think she can separate on volume, but I do think the optics of this fight are just going to be really close, in my opinion, unless Rosa's hitting takedowns. Obviously that possibility is there, but I mean, I don't really see how you can be a fan of Juice on Rosa when she has likely limited finishing upside, and she's going to be in a volume striking fight with a pretty good volume striker who's likely a better boxer than her. I feel like Glenbot said, shout out to being part of the Leech Army at UFC 305. You know it, man. Mr. Melodrama, what's up, boys? What's going on, man? Yeah, but I mean, I just think it's going to play. I think unless Rosa's getting takedowns, I think it plays out competitively. I lean to the Rosa side. I think her shots and her leg kicks in particular do better attritional damage than Penny's does. Penny's hands seem kind of harmless. But it's just like one of these like kind of grimy women's fights where I wouldn't really want to be taking a position on the Rosa side in a fight that's probably just going to be 3 rounds of volume striking. Moving on, we got Charalapos Gregorio taking on Toshiomi Kazama. Current price, Gregorio minus 250. Comeback on Kazama plus 210. I played Gregorio at like minus 180. I think the current price is right, though. I don't have any interest in. I would not recommend anybody to bet it here. I don't like either of these guys, to be quite candid. I think Gregorio has pretty suspect cardio. He can be a bit low volume. I just don't really think his game is suited for this level, as in the UFC level. But with that said, very fast hands, carries a lot of power. He's a decent grappler. And on the Kazama side, I mean, the reason I play Gregorio is I think Kazama is like at best a mid-card LFA fighter. I just don't think this guy's got much, no hands at all. He's a punching bag on the feet. His entire game revolves around jiu-jitsu, and it's like Glenbot asking about Champo sub 2-3. That is bold, man. I mean, this guy's going to slow down if it goes into 2-3, I think. It could happen, though. But I think, like Kazama, he wants to grapple. He wants to clinch you up and drag you down from the clinch and then work his jiu-jitsu. But one, his wrestling is pretty shit. I don't think his clinch wrestling is very good. And honestly, his jiu-jitsu, I just don't think is that good either. Like, of the two, I think Champo is the much, much, much better grappler. He's a much better wrestler. He obviously trains at a camp with a ton of great jiu-jitsu players. And I think if Kazama can close distance, he's especially while they're fresh, he's going to get out grappled bad. But even, while they're not fresh, I saw 2 fights ago, this guy's fighting a kickboxer and getting, put on bottom and just playing guard. I just feel like if Kazama does survive the first round, I think Charalapos is still going to be able to counter grapple him and get the top position and likely hold him down. I feel like, don't get me wrong, I could see a world in which Gregorio is exhausted after a round and he's counter grappling with him, getting the top position, but eating some shots off bottom, getting swept, loses a janky decision or gets subbed late. I just don't rate it as that high outcome. And while they're fresh, I think Gregorio is it's just going to be target practice for him on the feet. And Kazama's been knocked out in 3 of his last 4 fights. I don't think he's very durable. So yeah, I mean, I don't think either is much of a prospect or will be around the UFC long, but I think Gregorio, I mean, he's got a much better pedigree. He's from a much better camp. He's obviously a much better athlete and a much better wrestler. I think he's got every tool to win this fight, but I think minus 250 is fine. I don't really have I don't think there's anything else on this fight that's really that interesting in to play. Moving on, Yana Santos, Chelsea Chandler. Interesting fight here. Know a lot of sharp people that are on the Santos side. Current price, Yana Santos minus 145. The comeback on Chandler is plus 125. Honestly, I can't get there on Yana Santos for a bet, though. I think there's a lot that can go wrong on the Santos side in this fight. Obviously she's a more skilled fighter. If anybody's watched Chelsea Chandler, she's kind of just an angry ogre, for lack of a better word, on the feet, without really a lot of coherent skills. So yeah, I mean, Yana's she's a bit crisper of a striker, has better defense for sure. Technically, she's a better clinch fighter. And actually, she's not much older than Chandler, believe it or not. She's only like a year and a half older than her. The thing is, Yana obviously just had a kid. I think she's looked like shit recently, to be quite frank. I think her gas tank has looked a little bit suspect in recent years. But all of that, I could kind of dismiss all of that, in the context of breaking down this fight. What I can't dismiss is Yana's the main way Yana likes to fight is getting into the clinch. Like, that's the truth. She is, I think, a better distance striker than Chandler. But man, you'd be hard pressed to find a fight where Yana just decided to keep a fight at distance and strike with them for 15 minutes. It's just not her game. She wants to come in there and clinch you up. And usually, especially early in fights, she tends to have a lot of success with it. But usually about 3 to 4 minutes, she starts to slow a little bit. And, she's fighting a woman in Chelsea Chandler who is also, whose best ability is in the clinch. Now, I think Yana is the better clinch fighter, but Chandler is the naturally much bigger woman and much stronger woman. I think clinch exchanges early are going to favor Yana, but I kind of think as the minutes drag on, it's going to start getting a bit hairy in those exchanges, so I don't think it's going to be as one way as most people think. Maybe this will be the time Yana keeps that distance and she just outstrikes her. But, at distance, I think Chandler has more equity for landing a big shot and hurting Yana. I do. I think she hits harder. Now, Chandler's much more open to hit, and I think Yana can hit her, but I don't think Yana's got much power, and I think Chandler does have some pop. And then the other thing that really, really just concerns me for Yana is just about every woman that has tried to put Yana on her back has been able to. And once Yana's there, she's got nothing really. She defends takedowns at like 46%. And I don't really rate Chandler's wrestling, but if they're getting in clinch exchanges, it's not really hard for me to picture her hitting a trip takedown out of the clinch or dragging her down. And I think if Chandler gets on top of Yana, she's actually pretty good in top position. I think she could really do some damage there or at least hold her down. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not dying to bet Chandler, and I probably wouldn't unless it got to plus 140 or plus 150. Just because, I mean, look, the bottom line is I've said all of this talk about why I don't like the Yana side of things, but, we got to be honest about this here. I don't think Yana's looked great lately, but she just lost a split decision to Carol Hossa. She lost to Holly Holm, and she lost to Irene Aldana. I can't really, there's a lot I just can't really get upset at her for losing those fights, in my opinion. Obviously, she beat Ketlin Vieira, probably a robbery, but she did win that fight. She's just been fighting a different class of fighter, than Chelsea Chandler has. So it's like you have to. I do think you have to project her to probably perform better for a bit longer than you might ordinarily. But with that said, I don't know. I think this is a sketchy fight, and I think there are ways that this fight could go wrong for Yana that a lot of the market's not really anticipating, both in terms of her getting hurt on the feet, her potentially gassing out, or just ending up on bottom. Yeah, I mean, I lean Chandler at the number, but like I said, I wouldn't play her unless it got to plus 140, 150 range. Moving on, Chris Gutierrez taking on short notice replacement here, Quang Lei. I didn't tape Lei too much, so I don't have much to say here. But Gutierrez is minus 600. That should tell you really all you need to know about this fight. Come back on Lei plus 425. Yeah, I mean, Lei shouldn't have much for him. Lei is an okay grappler or okay-ish grappler, but I don't think he's good enough to really have much success against Gutierrez with takedowns or really controlling him. On the feet, decent left hook. He's got decent amount of power, but nothing crazy. There's just such a giant gap in level of competition and skill level here. I don't think Gutierrez is going to have a hard time seeing the shots coming at all. Gutierrez is obviously known for his leg kicks, but I think he's going to be able to just handily outstrike him without too much of a problem, just in the boxing too. I think Gutierrez should cruise, maybe stop him on the back end of this fight. So, yeah, not a lot to say. Gutierrez is a borderline top 15 fighter taking on a guy who's just being brought in because they were only going to have 9 fights on this card. So, he's going to handle business, I think. Moving on, Danny, left-handed god Barlo. He's taking on Nikolai Vernikov. Current price, Barlo minus 360. Comeback on Vernikov plus 295. Yeah, this is a cool fight. I think, Danny Barlo is an interesting prospect to me. He's got, I don't want to say he's got some big holes. We don't really know. I think he's a bit rote in how he strikes, just a lot of 1-2s. But with that, and so I think there's probably going to be someone who capitalizes on him in the grappling or just with striking diversity eventually that comes along. But with that said, his hands are remarkably fast. Hits very hard. He's very, very long for the weight class. And fights at a very, very high output pace. Those are all things you really, really like to see. And so he's not someone I'm eager to fade. He's just, he's a dynamic striker. I think he should probably get to the top 20 to 15. I don't want to say easily, but I do think, with his athleticism and his speed alone, his physical attributes are probably going to enable him to get there. On the other side of Nikolai Vernikov, I know a lot of people were bullish on this guy going into his Contender Series fight where he lost to Michael Morales. But honestly, he didn't Michael Morales is a huge prospect, and he didn't really embarrass himself in that fight. Morales actually kind of defaulted to wrestling to win that fight. He was having issues on the feet with Vernikov, which I thought was pretty interesting. Vernikov, decent hands, decent hand speed, a lot of power himself. He could knock out Barlo here. This is going to be, I think, I guess Vernikov could try to grapple him. He has in the past, but I just feel like, yeah, I feel like Vernikov's not a great wrestler. He just doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to really capitalize on Barlo in that regard here. Maybe he'll go for it. Maybe he'll have success with it. It's possible, but I don't think he's a great wrestler given what we saw in the Morales fight. And on the feet, Vernikov, he packs a punch. He's got more than enough power to knock Barlo out here. The big thing and the big difference I see between the two are twofold. The first is the speed. Barlo is just so much faster than Vernikov is. Honestly, he might be the fastest striker at 170. No joke. Dude's hands are just lightning. And so I think Vernikov is going to have some trouble keeping up with that and just picking his shots and finding them, on top of which making it even more hard or making it more difficult. He's giving up that kind of a speed edge. He's also giving up 5 inches of reach in this fight too. So it's like he's trying to deal with a guy who measures distance pretty well, who's got a huge speed edge and also has 5 inches of reach on him. And then to cap it off, Barlo is fairly defensively responsible on the feet, whereas Vernikov has virtually no standing defense. It's okay early, but it tends to fall apart very, very, very quickly. So I think Barlo is going to have a very, very easy time finding a home for his shots, whereas I think Vernikov is going to have significant difficulty finding his shots against Barlo. And then, the last part of this to me is the cardio. I don't think Barlo's got the best cardio ever. He did look like he was starting to slow a bit against Josh Quinlan in his last fight, pre-knockout, but his cardio is good enough, man. He can give you a hard 12 minutes. I don't think he's going to have a hard time getting to the bell in 15-minute fights, whereas Vernikov's cardio looks extremely, extremely sketchy to me. So, yeah, I kind of think if it clears 5 minutes, Barlo's going to probably dumpster him and potentially finish on the back end of the fight. Honestly, the best path for Vernikov probably would be to try to wrestle him. I just don't think unless he wrestles him and finishes him, and I don't think his submission grappling is really that good. I feel like Vernikov's going to probably gas from that. He's going to probably gas from any game plan. So, Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say he's fucked because Vernikov seems like a fairly talented fighter and he's a dangerous fighter with power. But I do think he's really up against it here. So, like, you know, I tried to fade Barlo with Quinlan last fight. That was a mistake. I learned a lot from that fight about him. I think the current price, like minus 360, is fine. We're only 28 minutes in here. Let's take a look. What do we got? Barlo ITD minus 105 is not. It's actually not horrible, to be completely honest. Barlo in rounds 2s plus 425. Oh, round 3 plus 525. Fuck that. No, Barlo ITD is not horrible, honestly. I hate laying juice on ITDs, but I do think things are going to get really, really bad for Vernikov the longer this fight goes. Dix Insider asked, did I get Bedoya on Saturday? I did not. I did not bet Rolando Bedoya. Moving on, though, we get to, hold on, where are we in this card? The co-main event of the evening, Chepe Mariscal taking on Damon the Leech Jackson, the first of 2 leeches I will bet over the next 2 weeks. I have a unit and a half on Damon Jackson, plus 187 here. I think it's a decent fight for him. Some concerns about his age and his cardio, but honestly, like going into tape, my recollection of Mariscal was that he was a very, very good scrambler and a good defensive wrestler, and that's kind of what you hear when you listen to people talk about him. But going through his tape, I actually don't really think that's the case at all. Most of the fights he's been pretty heavy scrambling in, like guys have been making mistakes against him. I don't know. Most people probably don't remember this unless you went back and saw it. But this guy fought Sean Soriano in late 2020 and got comprehensively out-grappled by Soriano. Just completely dominated for 15 minutes in the grappling. I don't know how many of you remember Sean Soriano in the UFC. Sean Soriano is a guy whose weakness is grappling. You know, the guy is just not a very good grappler, and he dominated there. A particular note I thought was, you know, he was consistently hitting takedowns out of the clinch here, where Chepe is allegedly a judo black belt, but he didn't look very strong there. And then I kind of went through his tape past that because he was a bit younger. He's obviously improving, but I don't actually think he's that strong in the clinch either. You know, you go back to the Trevor Peak fight. Now, he dominated that fight, but Peak was turning him in the clinch a lot, which seemed pretty odd because I don't think Peak is very good in those positions at all or has really much fundamental understanding about grappling. So I think there are some places that Jackson can capitalize in this fight, especially because Jackson loves the clinch himself, both striking out of it and grappling out of it. And then on bottom, like I don't think Mariscal's got really a lot there. You know, he tends to give up his back a lot to get up, which isn't likely to work very well against Damon Jackson. I don't actually think he's that good at scrambling. And Jackson is extremely, I mean, he got the Leech nickname for a reason. He's extremely heavy on top. So, like, I think it's a fight that Damon Jackson can win, honestly. Like, I think Jackson can get this fight down and potentially dominate it. Now, with all that being said, the other side of this is Chepe Mariscal's a fucking bulldog, and Damon Jackson has kind of shown some propensity for getting himself into brawls and embracing brawls lately. And I don't really think that's something he wants to do here. You know, Mariscal, you know, he's not the cleanest striker ever. And I actually think Jackson could have a lot of striking success on the feet too, like finding a home for his shots, except Jackson's defense isn't great either. The big difference between these two on the feet is Mariscal, 1, hits a lot harder, but number 2 is way, 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 way more durable than Damon Jackson is. So Jackson getting himself sucked into a brawl could be big trouble. And if Jackson starts to slow and the takedowns stop coming, he could be in really, really deep shit here. And so, like, I understand why he's an underdog. You know, Chepe's younger. He's got way better cardio. He's way more durable, and he hits harder. Those are very, very friendly macro dynamics. Where I just disagree is I think Jackson's cardio is probably being overstated. You know, both Argueta and Billy Q made him work really, really, really hard. And Argueta is a good grappler. And Billy Q is just like, he's just so spastic when you're trying to control him. He makes you work. And he also landed 50 body shots in that fight against Jackson. I don't really think, I'll put it this way. If my read on the grappling is right, I am not convinced Chepe is going to be able to make him work that hard. And I think body triangles could come from Jackson and allow him to just rest in those positions. Kind of similar to the Hernandez fight, to be honest. But I think it's an interesting fight. You know, I think you have to favor Chepe here a little bit just because big durability edge, big age edge, probably a pretty large finishing upside edge in this fight. But I think given that Jackson likely has, I mean, honestly, this could be a repeat of the Argueta fight. Like, it wouldn't shock me at all if it looks exactly the same, where Jackson gets an immediate takedown and a back take very quickly. That literally wouldn't shock me. I'm not saying that'll happen, but I can imagine it happening. So, with that being the case, I just feel like it's very hard to make Chepe, pass like minus 125 here. So, yeah, I think Jackson's got more upside to dominate the fight from bell to bell, but I do think, Chepe's hardware and youth and just general frenetic energy could give Jackson a hard time and probably justifies him being a small favorite. Moving on, the main event, Marcin Tybura taking on the Polar Bear, Serghei Spivac. Two guys I've bet on a lot over the course of their careers. Big fan of both of these guys. But yeah, I bet Tybura pretty big. I bet 2.1 units on him at minus 105, thinking the line was extremely stupid and it was probably going to move. It did move, just not towards me. And I added another unit to him at plus 135 yesterday. So I've got 3.1 units on Marcin Tybura here. First, the bear case here. I mean, obviously, I think anybody who's cares about this fight has probably seen the first fight. Obviously, Tybura won that fairly clean. The one thing I'll say about the first fight is, even though, it was a pretty clear 30-27 Tybura, he did lose the striking in that fight at distance. He got outstruck at distance, I think 20-15, and you could see Spivak looked a bit more comfortable in the boxing than Tybura looked in that fight. And I don't really think that's very likely to change in this fight. I think Spivak is still probably a bit more. I mean, Tybura is comfortable striking, but I think Spivak's boxing is a bit tighter and he's a bit longer. So and his throws and shots very, very straight. So I think there is some equity there for him to have some success striking. On top of which, Spivak, when the first fight happened, was 25 years old. Tybura was 34 years old. Tybura is now 38. Spivak's now 29. And Spivak was about 235 pounds in the first fight. Now he's fighting about 255, very possibly on steroids. I don't know. So yeah, those are all macro factors here that certainly favor the Spivak end of this. The age factor's on his side. He's put on some size. He's probably made some improvements. So the question is that enough to kind of outweigh, what we saw in the first fight? And I don't really personally think so. And it's not just about the first fight. It's about like what we've seen from Serghei Spivac and Marcin Tybura both in the times before and since. On the Spivak side, look, the guy is, he's won some really good fights recently. He's got a couple of really, really nice wins. He's gone out there, he's hit takedowns, and he's absolutely dominated guys on the ground. Derek Lewis ripped through him. Just takedown for takedown for takedown and finish. Augusto Sakai, I bet him there, absolutely ripped through him. Takedown, just eventually broke him and finished. Greg Hardy, same exact deal. You have to go back to... Yeah, look, those are all, his last three wins were all very, very dominant performances. And his last two losses were Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall, which is like, who gives a fuck? Aspinall did beat Tybura. Cyril Gane would beat Tybura. So it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, you can't really put much stock in that. What I will say is, though, all three of those guys, Lewis, Sakai, and Hardy, they were just, layup matchups for Spivak. And even going like back before that, you had his fight with Jared Vandera, which was the same deal. Vandera couldn't stop takedowns, and he absolutely hammered Spivak on the ground there. You had his fight with Felipe, where Felipe was actually kind of beating him up a bit on the feet, and he was able to kind of take him down and edge that fight out. And he had his win against Tai Tuivasa, or another guy, same deal. Couldn't stop the throws, kept getting thrown, taken down until he got subbed. That is kind of the game of Spivak. If you can't stop his judo throws, he is going to fucking maul you. He's pretty good on top. He throws some nasty ground and pound, and he's a nasty judo player. The thing is, and this is the big thing for me, and it hasn't really changed since the first matchup, it's like, if Spivak's game is not working, there's not really a whole lot else there. So it's like, let's go to the fights where it hasn't worked. Alexei Olenek, he pretty clearly didn't want to engage with him on the feet, and the scary thing about that fight is, that should have been a layup standing, but Olenek just wouldn't fuck off. Just kept coming for him all fight, and it ended up being an extremely dicey fight down the stretch there. Spivak backing up on his horse, gassed out horribly in that fight at a pace that wasn't even too violent. It's also the only other time we've seen Spivak on the ground since the first Tybura fight. And when he got grounded in that fight, he looked as bad as he ever did. Couldn't get off his back, was giving up passes left and right, just seemed like he didn't really know what to do there. So, I mean, that was ugly, and we haven't seen him on his back again since. Since then, he got knocked out by Tom Aspinall. Don't care about that. Doesn't really mean much. He had those 3 aforementioned fights, Hardy, Sakai, Lewis. All guys, very, very easy to take down. Pretty good matchups for him. And then he had Serghei. Now, I don't really care that he got stopped by Gon. I don't care that he got badly outstruck by Gon. I bet Gon big. I expected that. It's just a guy that measures distance the way Serghei does is just a very, very difficult guy to, judo. What concerned me with that fight, though, is the way, and the Aspinall fight, too, frankly, is the way, Spivak went for basically 2 takedowns. As soon as they didn't work, he just basically wilted and stopped fighting. But that's literally what happened. He kind of just shelled up, didn't even, look, him getting knocked out doesn't matter, but he just basically stopped throwing strikes. He just kind of gave up and let Spivak or let Gon tee off on him for about another 6 minutes after that, which I thought was pretty concerning. And there were signs of that, earlier in his career. I don't think his gas tank is very good at all. If he's forced to work really hard, you kind of saw him breathing very deep in the first Tybura fight as well. And he seems like a guy who, like, if plan A doesn't work, he doesn't really have a plan B. Something I thought was interesting is he basically only landed like 11 total distance strikes across his last 3 victories, which is pretty wild when you think about it. Landed 0 against Hardy or Lewis. He just wants to go to plan A, and if it works, he's going to dominate you and he's going to finish you. On the Tybura side, so it's like, okay, Spivak's bigger than he used to be. Obviously younger. He's probably improved his hands a bit, but I don't think you're seeing, a tangibly different fighter than what we saw the first time they fought. I mean, there's physical differences for sure, but in terms of how he looks fighting, it's more or less the exact same stuff you were seeing back in the day. And then you get the Tybura side, and I don't know if Tybura is evolving at all. He's maybe getting a bit tougher, but Tybura's a meat and potatoes fighter. He's going to do what he does. He's going to come out there. He's going to throw a lot of volume. He's going to hope you don't kill him on the feet. And he's going to try to power you into the clinch, eventually take you down and dominate. If he doesn't have that grappling advantage, he's just going to strike with you. The interesting thing about this fight, obviously we saw them fight before. Tybura, every time he got on top, was able to hold Spivak down with ease. I still think that's going to be the case if he gets on top here. Now, maybe Spivak's improved since the Olenek fight there. Certainly possible. He's 29 years old. Every single thing I've seen from Spivak on bottom looks awful low, and Tybura is very, very good on top. Can Tybura get it there? That's a more interesting question. And I don't know. I think it's going to be pretty interesting because Tybura's wrestling really isn't great. He's very good on top, but he's not really that great at wrestling itself. And so I think early in this fight, he could have some issues. What I do think is interesting, though, is that if Spivak tries to do, those trip throws, you saw him try to do it a couple times in the first fight. You saw Alexander Romanov try to do it to Dixon Sider said Spivak's evolving from a polar bear to a manatee. You saw him try to do it to Tybura in the first fight, and Tybura took his back with it. I don't think judo throwing he's too weight conscious in terms of his weight, where his weight's balanced. I think the judo throw easily. And I think anytime he really tries to do that, he's probably risking himself getting taken down and ending up in a back take. So I think that's extremely beneficial to Tybura in the context of this fight. The other thing that I think is extremely beneficial to Tybura in this fight is he's been 5 rounds before. I mean, he went 5 rounds with Fabricio Werdum in Werdum's heyday. He's got good cardio. And on top of which, if Tybura does end up on bottom, I don't really think Tybura is going to have much of an issue getting up. He's got very, very good get-ups, and it probably leads to him being able to counter-grapple and potentially getting takedowns himself. The big question, and honestly, I'm really, if Spivak comes out here and fucking mauls Tybura on the ground, I don't see that happening. But if it does, so be it. Then I'm just very, very directionally wrong about the course of this fight. Which could happen. I could be wrong about it. But I'd be really, really surprised at him coming out there and just mauling Tybura on the ground. I think it's much more likely if he tries to do that he ends up on bottom and ends up getting beaten up himself. Where I think Spivak has an edge is, like I mentioned before, the striking. And I do think I've heard some people disagree with me about this, but I do think there is some equity for Spivak knocking Tybura out in this fight. Tybura traditionally hasn't had issues with power from guys like Spivak. It's typically like fast, big hitters. But as I mentioned, Spivak has put on a lot of weight, and I do think he's got better hands. He's got a good 1-2. I could see him hurting Tybura early in this fight or potentially finishing him. Do I think it's high percentage? No. Spivak's got no standing KOs in his career, as far as I can tell, and no knockdowns in the UFC. So I'd be a little bit surprised, but I wouldn't be shocked. I kind of think that is the clearest path to a victory for Spivak here, because the biggest factor in this fight, other than Tybura is much more likely to hold him down than the other way around, is, in my opinion, the cardio difference. I think Tybura, and the thing is with Spivak, he's not going to be able to rest here. Tybura doesn't really let you rest. You may kill him, but he's going to keep coming forward. I mean, you look at that Alexander Volkov fight, man. He couldn't take him down, but he attempted 16 takedowns and landed 60 significant strikes across 3 rounds. He just would not let him rest. Spivak's not going to be able to rest, and I really very much doubt that he can fight at Tybura's pace for more than 8 to 10 minutes, really, before he starts to get tired, especially with more weight on his frame here. And so, I think Tybura is going to eventually take over this fight and break him the longer it goes, and probably finish him on the back end if he doesn't get knocked out. Dixon Sider says, give me vibes about Chias Sampani. We all thought it wouldn't go the same way, and it literally went the exact same way. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I think, honestly. I'm just I'm just kind of painting, using a broad brush to paint a picture here that it could go differently. And it could. There is a big age difference here. Spivak does hit hard, and Tybura is the mush of the week. So, I don't know. But what I will say is, I really think Spivak needs to have success early and probably needs to finish him early. And I think if he doesn't, he's going to get broken and get finished himself. I think you could make a really coherent argument here for waiting to bet Tybura live instead of betting him pre. The reason I'm not doing that is it's like if Spivak goes for one throw and ends up on bottom, Tybura is going to be like minus 300 at the end of round 1, But otherwise, if he doesn't, I actually think Spivak could have a lot of success early in this fight. But like I said, potentially hurt him, potentially finish him. But I do think, you have to contextualize Spivak here, and the fact that he hasn't knocked down anybody in the UFC, I think speaks kind of volumes about how much power he's carrying at heavyweight, and it's not a lot. I mean, he fought Alexei Olenek for 15 minutes and didn't even visibly hurt him. So how likely is it? I don't know. We're going to find out. I'm expecting a better version of Spivak than we got the first time they fought, but I still think Tybura presents a lot of issues. I think he's a better grappler. I think his work rate's better. His cardio is better. And I mean, honestly, the dude's just more tested in dogfights. Tybura is we have seen him go through the fire with guys like Walt Harris, Greg Hardy, and keep coming. Whereas every time when the shit hits the fan with Spivak, he is just ready to get the fuck out of there. So yeah, I think Tybura should be a favorite here. I think he should be like minus 150. I like him here. I've got 3 units on him. We'll see what happens, though. Maybe I'll be wrong. But anyway, guys, thanks for checking me out tonight. Next week, we'll be back. We're hoping we're going to have a guest. Could be Liam Picks Fights. We'll see. Couple other housekeeping notes here. I am going to be doing all season long Contender Show. I also already taped this whole card. I am thinking maybe I'll do it on Monday mornings, like after I drop my kids off, maybe like 8:30 or 9 a.m., something like that. Get people's week started off, on the right foot here and see what we got. But we got contenders for 10 weeks, so we'll be doing that. I'm going to do the next PFL show when it comes out. And yeah, I mean, that's it, guys. I hope you guys have some good bets this weekend. I hope we all make some money. I will not be live for the card. I'm going to be at my wife's cousin's wedding, so that's unfortunate. Well, it's not unfortunate. It'll be fun. But I won't be tweeting or anything like that. I will send out my breakdowns at the on Saturday morning. But yeah, guys, if you like the show, drop a like, subscribe. And like I said, if you have any PPH credit books, hit me up, DM me at MMA Fox, John Stargarian. I'll give you $250 for each you send me. If you send me 5, I'll give you a $1,000 bonus. Really appreciate it, guys. And yeah, promo code CLUB at Fight Numbers. Take it easy, everybody. Peace.